When you say Jammu and Kashmir, it always brings a certain intrigue. And if they talk about the strategic depth, what went behind? Was it all about just a group of Kabbali's, or perhaps a pan-Islamic forces which were obsessed with Kashmir and who did it all? Or were there others who were using these elements as puppets to create perhaps an area of flux which took more than 70 years for India to even address and perhaps bring a certain semblance of normalcy in that area, and a certain sense of control. Even though we realize that a huge part of what is actually sovereign Indian territory lies in foreign hands today. So, somebody who spent a lot of time diving into the depths of the strategic issues is, with regards to Jammu and Kashmir, all of it is with us. Here on this very, very special conversation. Iqbal Malhotra, a fantastic author and also thinker and also strategist, analyst. And he's come out with another book, which is called Dark Secrets. And it all dwells into the proxy wars of behind Kashmir. So, how does the untold story that you had penned along with Maruf Raza, from there you move into Dark Secrets, this book? So, where does this take it? Let's start from there, Iqbal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Narasimhan. The untold story, left me dissatisfied because the story, even though we tried to tell the untold story, but there was another story behind it. And the most interesting question was that why did the British leave India without a big fight? I mean, why did they transfer power? And why were they in such a hurry when the transfer of power was scheduled for June 30th, 1948? Why did they suddenly decide to leave on 15th August 1947? And what was their actual role in Kashmir? And why did the Chinese invade Aksai Chin? What was the magic of Aksai Chin that lured the Chinese into that forbidden land where Mr. Nehru once said that not even a blade of grass grows? So it was in order to actually answer these questions, to satisfy my own curiosity, that I delved into this subject even more vigorously. And then I came up with a lot of fascinating insights, which I decided to put into my new book called Dark Secrets, which is over here.
Well, you must get a copy. It's on the shelves and it's also there for mail order. You can buy it online. But what is the secret that you stumbled upon? Were there other nations involved? Or was it only Pakistan? Or was it
Well,
only China?
there were three other nations involved apart from Pakistan. And the main secret was that for the British, it was an existential issue to build the nuclear bomb to prevent the Soviets from overawing them in post-war Europe. Now, the Americans had denied access to the British to nuclear technology. So the British had no choice but to spy on the Russians. Now, the Russian nuclear program was located barely 1,200 kilometers from India's then borders, British India's borders. And the British decided to actually engage in this spying activity. Now, a very interesting incident happened in 1945. There was an Indian army officer called Prince Burhanuddin, who was the Prince of Chitral, and he had defected to the INA and was one of the close leaders of Subhash Chandra Bose, and followed Bose very religiously and fanatically. He was arrested in Burma in 1945 and brought on trial to the Red Fort, and the presiding judge was Brigadier Karyappa, who later on became the first Indian chief of the Indian Army. And after the trial, Brigadier Karyappa sentenced him to 6 years of rigorous imprisonment. And he also got off the dais and shook hands with Prince Burhanuddin. Now, this really set the cat among the pigeons as far as the British were concerned. Because if the loyalty of Brigadier Karyappa to the British Crown was suspect, then the loyalty of the 25 lakh Indian Army soldiers to the British Crown would also be suspect. So they had to leave India. But they also wanted to stay on because they wanted to conduct their spying operations on the Soviet nuclear program from Gilgit. And they had seismological stations, acoustic monitoring stations, and they were carrying on regular overflights from Rawalpindi and Risalpur near Peshawar over the Soviet territory to monitor this entire Soviet nuclear program. Now the question was that how could they stay on after legally leaving India? And I'm sure that they broached this idea to the leaders of India, independent India at that point of time, that look, if you let us keep our bases for as long as we want in order to glean this nuclear technology, then you can probably have Kashmir and Northwest Frontier Province. But because the original plan was that Pakistan would just consist of a part of Punjab and Sindh, and NWF and Kashmir would be joined to India and would constitute the land bridge to Central Asia. But because of the policy of non-alignment and the desire to distance ourselves from the former colonial power, we decided to say no. We want to pursue an independent policy. We don't want military bases. We're going to pursue non-alignment. So then the British had no choice but to create Pakistan and to absorb Kashmir into Pakistan so that their activity could continue untrammeled. And the big danger was that the Indian border was hardly 20 kilometers from Rawalpindi, and all the overflights were taking off from there. So they had to create an additional buffer. And that's how this whole story of this Azad Kashmir and this Muzaffarnagar Poonch belt evolved. And the other unanswered question was that why did the Indian army not recover all the territories in 1948 which had been invaded in by the Kabelis? Now, I spoke to Mr. Kuldeep Nair, who was eminent journalist and who had done a lot of research on this subject. And he told me that Major General Kulwant Singh, who was in charge of the Indian Army's operations in Kashmir, had been told by New Delhi that please do not go beyond the recovery of the Kashmiri speaking areas, because we don't want to absorb the Punjabi population into India since they've already voted for Pakistan. So the Indian army stopped. So we actually never attempted to get back the territories that we needed, which was part of India, but which were in the control of the British, because the British didn't want us to go there. So this was the intrigue. And then Stalin realized that he needed more uranium ore for his nuclear program. And the the Soviet nuclear bomb was 8 times as inefficient as the American one. And the Soviets were running out of uranium in Xinjiang. They did aerial surveys and they found that the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang, which is part of it overflows into Aksai Chin, was full of uranium ore. So Stalin got Mao into Xinjiang as late as July of 1949 to be a third party to deal with the Uyghurs and all the other Muslim inhabitants who were revolting against the Russians, and actually build a road into Aksai Chin to connect the road, the mines and the mine head from Aksai Chin to Khojan in Tajikistan. So the reason why the Chinese came in January 1950 into Aksai Chin was basically to build the road and start mining, using labor to mine uranium, and then actually ship it by road to Tajikistan, where it was being processed into uranium yellow caps. So the Soviets and the Chinese, who were the proxies of the Soviets, and the British and their proxies, the Pakistanis, were all interested in this real estate of Gilgit, Aksai Chin, and the Muzaffarnagar Poonch belt. Now, subsequently thereafter, the Chinese interest in Aksai Chin today and the Eastern Ladakh is because of the water. They need the water for their semiconductor industry, and that's why they are spending the second winter in full force in Eastern Ladakh.
In Eastern Ladakh. We'll come to the water and semiconductor part in just a bit. Let's just go back to that history aspect. So, if multiple nations knew that there are uranium deposits there, and that there is something which the Russians are busy doing, two things which befuddle me. One is, did Jawaharlal Nehru and the then establishment not know that Aksai Chin, a blade of grass, may not be growing on top, but there is uranium in the bottom inside the earth? Why did they give it up? That's one. Second part, India could have very clearly told the Russians, listen, we'll build a road, you secure it for us. And they could have told the Brits, listen, you want to watch what they are doing? You can do that too. We are still non-aligned.
Well, the first question was the one about the Russians, right? About
yes.
Well, the fact is that the Indian government was not really interested in engaging the Russians or the Chinese or the British, for that matter, in all these activities. They were really concerned with securing power, and in 1947, and there was the partition. and Nehru had his own vision of building India along a Fabian socialist line. So the fact is that they never actually engaged, because the Indian Army sent in 1952 a mission to Aksai Chin to see the extent of the Chinese road building. And we already had an embassy in Kashgar in Xinjiang. And we had a military outpost in Gartok in Western Tibet, where there were 150 Indian Army soldiers stationed there till 1954. And I had occasion to interview for one of the films I did the commanding officer, who is a man called Major S.M. Krishnatri. And he said that we knew the Chinese were coming in. In 1950, we sent information to New Delhi, but nothing happened. So the point is that when you're building a coalition of non-aligned nations, and you don't want to introduce embarrassing subjects that might prove embarrassing for them and for the people you propose to build in this, join into this coalition, and therefore you gloss over these facts and say, "हाँ भाई ठीक है, बाद में हो जाएगा, we'll deal with it later on." But it never happened that way. So I agree with you. I mean, in hindsight, the government of India should have told the Russians, if you want uranium ore, we will mine it and export it for you, and we'll build the road. And should have told the British, if you want bases, you can keep your bases here, and that would have been true non-alignment. Except that the Russians then wouldn't have bought the ore from us, because the British and Russians were on the opposite sides. So we would have had to choose. Now you see, in 62, after pursuing 15 years of non-alignment, we fell into the arms of the Americans when the Chinese invaded us. And again, in 2020, we've done the same thing. So the wheel has turned a full circle from 1962 to 2022. You're back in the American camp. You've signed up with a Quad. You've done a nuclear deal under Manmohan Singh. You've joined the Quad under Mr. Modi. So the point is that if you have done all this and you realize that America is your natural ally, as Prime Minister Vajpayee used to say, you are natural allies, then why didn't you do this earlier on? What was this great experiment of non-alignment that had to be pursued, that required abandoning our interest in Tibet, abandoning our interest in Xinjiang, and retreating into a shell? And now we are boxed into that shell by the Chinese, because they have taken advantage of so many things. They economically dominate us, and they militarily also are confronting us and dominating us.
No, so somewhere foreign policy we didn't score as much. Let's say the previous leadership. Will that be a fair assessment to say that yes, you had a vision as to how you wanted to see independent India, but you also needed to first put primacy towards national security. You can't have an issue that's saying we are not going to go to war with anyone, so nobody's going to come attacking us. That is never the case. So, do you think that was flawed, Iqbal Chandji, based on your research, and a lot of it unfolded thereafter? Because many have said that the Americans also had strategic interests. They looked at Afghanistan and they cultivated Pakistan because India did not open its doors to them. And a lot of the CIA money went towards the Pakistanis, which they redirected in their proxy war against us.
You see, we had this policy of ambivalence. For some reason, we decided to surrender all our rights in Tibet. And then when the Chinese came into Tibet, we realized that, we did a wrong thing. So while on the one hand, we were espousing the mantra of non-alignment, on the other hand, we were clandestinely supporting the Americans and waging this secret war in Tibet against the Chinese by using Tibetan guerrillas and arming the Tibetans. Now, the Americans had extended an olive branch, not an olive branch, but they'd extended an offer to us in 1949 when Mr. Nehru went to see President Truman and said that, look, we will equip you, we will arm you, but you have to join us in the fight against communism. And, we'll build up your industry, we'll build you up as a shining example of a newly liberated, decolonized country, which is following the path of democracy and is opposed to communism. But we decided not to do that because of a utopian and naive view of the world, and we pursued this other path. So there was a flaw in our foreign policy matrix, because you have Tibet as a buffer. You have inherited power from the British government. They have transferred power. So the government of India remains the same. The rulers changed, but your interests also remain the same. So when your interests remain the same, why did you abandon Tibet? Now, we had troops in Tibet, maybe only 300-400 troops, but symbolically, the Indian army was guiding our trading interests in Tibet. ran the post and telegraph system in Tibet. We, in fact, there was a principality near Lake Mansarovar called Minsar, which was also sovereign Indian territory, and we had an embassy in Lhasa. Now we surrendered all these rights. We surrendered our rights in Xinjiang, so we lost our stake in that part of the world, and we had to withdraw and retreat. And we opened up ourselves to further advances by the Chinese, because every agreement that we signed with them, they used against us
Yeah.
to justify claims. Now, when we surrendered our rights in Tibet, then they said that now all the Tibetan rights which were tested or untested are also devolving onto us. So they began to push into our territory in Arunachal and in eastern Ladakh.
No, I understand that, and I think we're still bearing the brunt of all of that, and these are historical mistakes. So when there are questions which are asked, and I'll stay clear of those questions, we're saying, when are you going to get us back the land? It is something which is a historical strategic mistake that some of the early people who were tasked with governing and setting up India didn't think of it in terms of the long-term foreign policy wise. Now let's come to the current situation. You talked about the water aspect. Now, has the dynamics around this proxy war around Jammu and Kashmir, has it now changed a different dimension? Has it taken a different dimension given what is going to be the war on the future will be either on data or on water? That's what many people believe. Do you agree?
The thing is that the Chinese have recently started shifting in the last 3 years their semiconductor industry from southern China into Xinjiang.
Hmm.
Now, the two major ingredients in manufactured semiconductors are water and electricity. And on the Indus River in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, they are in the process of building the Dimer Basha Dam and the Punji Dam at a cost of $16 billion. Now, the
Hmm.
bankrupt Pakistani economy cannot absorb the electricity generated by those dams. That electricity is going to go into Xinjiang to run these Chinese semiconductor complexes, and they are building vast reservoirs by the side of these dams, which are almost something like 50 kilometers long in that mountainous Himalayas and Karakorams, which is an engineering marvel. But why? The question is, why are you building those reservoirs to store water when you should be actually letting the water go through into Western Punjab for fertilizing the land and irrigating the land? But you're actually building it because you have some other alternative use for that water. Now we know that because of global warming and glacial melt, for 30 years, certain glaciers in the Himalayan region and in the Karakorams are going to melt, and their water is going to flow into the Indus. Now these rivers are the Nubra River, the Shayok River, which are around the Siachen Glacier, and there is the Jangchemo River and the Galwan River. All of these combine, and once the Indus crosses Indian territory at Turtok, then it gains speed. Now,
Yeah.
if India were to set up run-of-the-river projects in Ladakh to tap the hydropower potential of the river, which we are allowed to do because we have 20% rights over the Indus, then what would happen is that the modern hydrology that the Chinese want to bring in could not be brought in, because they want to also accelerate the glacial melt by melting some of the glaciers and bringing more water in, because they have that view that they need the water today. So the fact is that the Chinese have this design. That is their purpose. That's why they moved into the Depsang Plains. That's why they were in the Gogra Hot Springs. That's why this is the second winter they're dug in there, because ultimately they want by hook or by crook to push us to the west bank of the Indus. This is my argument. I may be wrong, but I'm just saying that why in this bleak and uninhabited area now, which has been mined of its ores and its gold and its petroleum and its beryllium and thorium, molybdenum, everything has gone. Now, why are you still there, and why are you fighting with India? I mean, we have our trade is now $125 billion since 2014, when Mr. Modi came to power. The Indo-Chinese trade has gone from $39 billion to $125 billion, and this year our deficit has mushroomed to $69.4 billion, which is close to what our defense budget is. So we are actually paying them this money every year, and they have deindustrialized our economy by decimating our industries, metal manufacture, chemical engineering, pharmaceuticals, all of these industries which were had a certain amount of labor employment, And unemployment is the big issue in our country today. They've destroyed our industrial base. And plus, we are paying them every year. Now, nothing is being done. The government has not worked out a plan that how do you deal with the Chinese. I mean, that is the most important issue. You cannot
Yeah.
avoid it. We've been avoiding it for the last 75 years. We've got to come to grips with it and call a spade a spade.
True, but if that means the moment you decide to call a spade and secure your borders and your waters, they have dug their heels and they've tried to escalate to ensure create a stalemate that if they cannot do it, हम तो डूबेंगे तुम्हें भी नहीं डूबेंगे. So that's the kind of thing. If I can't do it, I won't let you do it too. That's the situation where we have come to. So as you look at the situation, you think abrogation of 370, which happened in the last 2 years, was perhaps one big strategic shift which allowed us to secure at least some parts of Jammu and Kashmir? Or do you believe it's too little too late and there's got to be something far more radical and diabolical that needs to be done going forward if we have to secure ourselves in the future?
You see, the thing is that this 370 was already diluted over the
Hmm.
years. So, I
Hmm.
mean, this was just a formalization and, capping it and saying, okay, it's diluted. And it was more symbolic than anything else. I
Hmm.
mean, you need
Hmm.
something
Yeah.
substantive. How are you going to protect your territory? How are you going to ensure that you are not going to be subject to this kind of blackmail that the Chinese have been doing in the last 2 years? Now, you want to figure that out. I mean, how do you plan your moves? You made the right moves in joining the Quad. Now you've got to increase the pressure on the Chinese in the Indian Ocean area. You've got to build alliances with the Israelis, the Japanese, and the Americans to upgrade your technology as far as surveillance, as far as reconnaissance goes, as far as the electronics go. And you've got to protect yourself against Chinese attacks, malware attacks on your sensitive facilities of the
Hmm.
economy. They don't need to actually physically fire guns across the LAC. They can just
Yeah.
hit either our power grid or our banking system and cause chaos, and then present us with a challenge and figure out how are we going to react to that, because that's also an attack on our sovereignty. So we need to figure out how to deal with the Chinese, and I don't think we have figured it out as of now. Till today, we don't know what we want to do with the Chinese. And it's always
Right.
a short term ad hoc solution rather than a concerted political consensus in this country that, look, this is our goal. We've got to rebuild our industries. We've got to rebuild our economy. We've got to figure out how we can outflank the Chinese. Now, might be war in Europe, in the Ukraine.
Hmm.
And as you know, in the Times of India today, there's an article which says that that Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, has issued a statement in favor of Putin. So the
Hmm.
Chinese are getting closer into an embrace with the Russians. And tomorrow, they may decide to start a second front by fingering Taiwan in some way or the other. I
Yeah.
was in a debate yesterday where the person disagreed with me because he said there are 2 million Taiwanese in Shanghai. I mean, that's not a deterrent
Yeah.
against the Chinese attacking Taiwan. So if there's a two-front war, then what will happen and what will our posture be, and how will we conduct our relationship with the Russians?
Hmm.
So it's a very interesting dynamic. It's a chessboard fraught with multiple options. So we have to figure out
Yeah.
how we're going to deal with it for our own
True.
interests.
True, and it's not about being aligned with anybody, or neither is it about being non-aligned. It's picking and choosing your partners on a case-to-case basis and create a multilateral equation where you are able to secure your interests.
No, no,
That
no. I
that,
think
that perhaps is the way to go.
you have to choose a side,
You
because
have to
this is
choose a
a
side.
technology war. You have to choose a
Hmm.
side. If you don't choose the right side, then either you can say "Ji Hazur" to the Chinese, or you can say to the Americans, "Bhai, aap hamare mai baap ho." But the interesting thing is that, look, North America, Canada, Britain, and America, there are so many Indians who are in the political system. I mean, they're all NRIs. They are all in the
Hmm.
political system. Now, there are no Indians in the political system in China or in Russia.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
at least if we have got our ethnic brothers and
Hmm.
sisters in the political system in these countries, we should
Hmm.
woo them and align with them because we have an interest with them. They're not
Hmm.
alien to us after all. I mean, look,
Yeah.
Rishi Sunak is the finance minister of the UK. He might be the next prime minister. The next prime minister of Canada might be a Sardar. The
Hmm.
defense minister is a Sardar. The second defense minister is also a Punjabi. Now the new one. So
Hmm.
there is a confluence of interest that we have with North America and with the UK. So let us build on that alliance. Let us build on those strengths. Choose a side and face the Chinese, because the threat is not from them, it's from the Chinese
Chinese.
and their
No,
subalterns, the Pakistanis. I mean,
absolutely.
the Chinese, they have been helping the Pakistanis run this terrorism because it cost them hardly $50 million a year to keep terrorism alive, so that we cannot conduct any infrastructure projects in Jammu and Kashmir. And even this Ram Ganga project, they were
Yeah.
shelling continuously, and it was a test of the resolve of successive Indian governments to actually complete that project, because of the difficulties that the Pakistanis and the Chinese had placed in our way.
Placed in a way. No, so if they can get to whatever they will to try and make sure that they stymie our growth and they keep their strategic interests in mind, we'll also have to be ruthless and we'll also have to turn around and give it back to them and say that listen, don't try and finger us because we know how to do it to you, and you can't do it in bits and pieces. That's one aspect which perhaps everybody would say that there has to be a certain level of consistency and doggedness in the way you would pursue and you would identify who your enemy is, know very clearly what you're going to do, and like you said today, we have to pick sides and align ourselves because somewhere that is the need of the hour. Iqbal Janji, now you've really set the premise for reading your book.
Thank
And
you.
I'm very curious. I hope all those who are watching this are also intrigued and they would want to go ahead to reach out to the shelf and pick up that book and read through the dark secrets. History can be a great teacher. So we can always learn from the past so that we don't make mistakes, the same mistakes in the future. Thank you
Thank you,
so
Mr.
much.
Arjun. Thank you. Thank you for having me over.
Thank you. Wonderful speaking with you.